Hello and welcome to the SDG Dialogue on Gender Equality. My name is Nahla Valji and I will be your moderator for the day. The Sustainable Development Goals are the world's roadmap for a better future. We like to call them the world's to-do list. On the occasion of this year's International Women's Day, we will deep dive into the to-dos for SDG number 5 on gender equality. Joining me today are 6 amazing women leaders, titans of gender equality. Amina J. Mohammed, UN Deputy Secretary General, who is our host today. Sima Bahous, UN Women Executive Director. Hajer Sharief, Gender Equality and Women's Rights Activist. Nurtaç Afridi, the CEO of Godiva Company. And Paloma Costa, a socio-environmentalist and a member of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Welcome to you all. Our discussion will be centered around the Secretary General's 5 transformative actions for gender equality. 1, realize women's equal rights everywhere. 2, ensure equal representation of women in every sector at all levels of decision-making. 3, invest in women and focus on economic inclusion. 4, take emergency action to end all forms of violence against women and girls. And 5th, listen to the voices of young women. Before we dive into each of these topics, let's take a look at how gender equality is fundamental to achieving the SDGs.
The pandemic has increased inequalities for women and girls in all areas of life. And yet, there's never been more momentum to overhaul the power dynamics of gender, demanding change, challenging norms, sharing power.
Education is the right of every child, and especially for girls, this right should not be neglected.
There's so much left to do, and soon is not soon enough to get the world's to-do list for gender equality done.
We must, if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, if we want to have a better world, we must have women and men in full equality.
Now is the time to get specific. Every global citizen owes it to every citizen on the globe to fight for more women in positions of power, an urgent end to violence against women and girls, sexual and reproductive health rights, quality education for all girls, women equal in law, equal pay, and economic empowerment.
Achieving gender equality for the Sustainable Development Goals is bringing the 50% of our population in the world into the picture. What we need to understand is a fundamental right for all human beings.
Let's get this done. Gender equality, everywhere, now.
As we just heard, soon is not soon enough. And that is the urgency that is going to guide our conversation today. To set the frame and ambition for today's conversation, I am joined by the United Nations Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed. DSG, you recently traveled to Haiti, Costa Rica, and Ethiopia. Reflecting on these trips and the women that you met, what is your message for International Women's Day?
I think a really strong message that came for me, all 3 countries, is that women are leading, women are strong, women are survivors, but they, in every context, need to find the enabling environment to excel, to achieve those rights, and to be present in the 50% that's missing. And so for Haiti, very exciting for me to see, you know, in a place where gangs had taken over the schools and a minister of education had decided no, he was opening up. He opened up with mothers in the community. And what we saw there were girls who now could see the future. And they were already asking what next. And so, just restless and full of, I think, energy to just get through to the next space where they would actualize their dreams, but not just for themselves. They were talking about Haiti. In Ethiopia, of course, the context matters so much. And a lot of the times we're talking about contexts where there is inequalities and poverty and an environment where the economies are not doing so well, and so women are not even there. But in Ethiopia, this is conflict. And to see women bearing the brunt of the conflict without even asking for it, and then being cast aside when you see the brunt of rape, gender-based violence, cast aside, thrown to what I don't know, to the future that they don't know. And I think for me, coming back and being in the position I was, to speak to the men, to say that, these are your wives, your mothers, your sisters. When a man comes back from war, he's a hero. And yet, when women are the victims and sometimes are able to survive the war, then they're cast out. This is not acceptable. So again, the position that we have is one that is dispensable, and that shouldn't continue to happen. Last but not least, Costa Rica, young people and leadership, and seeing a country that quite frankly, the sky's the limit. Now they have got good foundations, but how do they involve women in leadership? We saw amazing people in the cabinet. Certainly the vice president of Costa Rica is an inspiration and has spoken to indigenous people, people of color, inspiring in the way in which she does it. She's not asking, she's assuming. And getting on with it, and I think that it's marvelous. So for me, I think the messages for International Women's Day are central rights of women in everything and whatever we do. That must be up front and center. Representation, and it's not just about percentages or numbers. It's what position you hold. So looking at decision making. Responsibilities, and then the investments to empower women, so we don't have to keep giving handouts. They're perfectly capable if empowered economically, and we need to see those investments happen. I would say last but not least, the silent pandemic is the gender-based violence, and we have to take that head on.
Thank you so much, DSG. And just to pick up the opportunity to realize their rights, the opportunity to lead, and I want to pick up on that question that you asked, what's next? And I think that's important for us to come back to in this conversation today. So thank you for framing the discussion for us today. With that, let's begin with the first topic, women's equal rights. Executive Director, women's rights are human rights. By 2030, over 150 million women and girls could emerge from poverty if governments implement positive and comprehensive strategies for economic inclusion. What are some of these strategies? What is UN Women advocating for? And how can we ensure the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in this moment when the impact of COVID-19 has been so acute for women and girls?
Thank you, Nahla, and thank you, DSG, for inviting me to be here today to mark International Women's Day. The numbers of UN Women and also the numbers from UN Statistical Division is showing us that we are not where we need to be on the SDGs. For example, on the SDG 5 in particular, of the 18 indicators that we are targeting to reach, only one is almost there and not even there. And this is the participation of women in governance. And therefore, we need to accelerate everything on the SDG 5, but also on all SDGs, because all SDGs in the end, SDG 5 is the docking station, as we say, but all the SDGs include gender equality and gender and women empowerment and women participation. Also, the pandemic itself has also, as we know, negatively affected women, and we need to ensure that we tackle this and that we also bring back the Sustainable Development Goals on track. Mm-hmm. And therefore, UN Women has identified 3 major areas where we would like to work on, which is 1 is care, 2 is job, and 3 is climate. We must see policies, better policies, new policies, new actions and investments to both recover from COVID and also to advance the SDGs. First, on care, if we want to speak on care, we know that the pandemic has seen that women were at the forefront. They were putting endless hours and numerous numbers of hours taking care of the society, taking care of the elderly, taking care of their children, and sometimes being teachers at home for their children. At the same time, this went unnoticed, unpaid, and the hours were accumulating for these women. And this kind of labor is also labor that is a social good for our societies. So we need to take action on that. We need to see that policies are put in place, investments are put in place so that women are integrated into the economy in such a way that they are recognized, their work is recognized, and that also the COVID recovery plans that we are putting take care of women, of their social protection, and also of the elderly and the young people as well, so that we can continue to move forward with the SDGs and with the well-being of our economy. I think also there are so many new jobs that are being, how shall I say, forecasted for coming after COVID. And I think there will be, many of them will be green jobs, and we need to ensure that women are included in those green jobs and that they are trained and ready to go into those jobs for their own livelihoods. This brings me to the job situation, and also the job situation. We need to know that women lost their jobs during COVID at a much faster rate than men, and they are regaining these jobs at a much slower rate than men. And this affects society, it affects their families, it affects the economy, and we need to be sure that we re-include them back into the formal economy and ensure that they are able to handle their own livelihoods and that they are empowered to do so. And this means that, this links us to the climate crisis. I mean, we are going from one crisis to the other. The climate crisis is now a crisis in the world, and we know that both gender equality and climate crisis are, as the SG of the UN has told us, they are the most challenging challenges of the time today, and we need to see how best to address those. On climate, we have the CSW coming up very soon, this March. It is going to have the priority theme as climate and gender equality, and we need to ensure that we really work together, all of us, as UN, as member states, as NGOs, as civil society, together to be able to keep women at the center of the climate crisis. We know that women are leaders on that. We know that women have indigenous knowledge and how to deal with climate. We know that women can do it, and we know that once empowered, once given the opportunity, once given the right policies, once given the right investments, they are able to move forward. So they are not always the victims, but many, many, many times we see that women are the leaders and they can take us forward on that. And we really need to ensure that we invest in that, and that the policies, the actions, the finance comes so that women are more empowered, and eventually we reach not only the SDG 5, but the different other SDGs that we need to bring back on track. And this will also help us also have a recovery from COVID that has women and gender equality at the center of it. And this is beneficial not only to women, but to the whole societies that we lead and we want to see flourish. So basically we need more finances for climate crisis, and we will also need, as the Secretary General has highlighted many times, and so did DSG Amina, the issue of financing for climate. This is extremely important. We need to see that the whole world comes in solidarity with this, and that the whole world comes to help with financing and financing solutions for the developing countries, in particular, where they need to be supported on that, on the policies, on the action, on the investment, and on the financing.
Getting back on track. Thank you so much for that,
Thank you.
Edie, and for spelling out not just the challenges, but the roadmap for recovery. Climate, jobs, and care.
Absolutely.
We know that the challenges that you spoke to with regards to getting back on track are even more challenging in conflict contexts. Hajer, let me bring you in here. In recent history, only a small fraction of negotiators, mediators, and signatories in major peace processes were women. And in fact, about 7 out of 10 of every peace processes do not include women mediators or women signatories at all. As a peace and human rights activist, can you tell us a little bit about the implications for this exclusion, both for women's rights as well as for sustainable peace?
Well, first of all, happy International Women's Day. I hope you will all enjoy it and celebrate the progress we made and make personal commitments to carry on our work, our collective work forward. Nahla, the question you asked is extremely important, and I wonder how many times we've asked this question, how many times women even decades ago asked this questions, and we're still asking this question, right? The fact that women are still not equally participating at the negotiation, at the peace table, how does that affect us? And how does that affect women generally? Well, first of all, it has definitely a negative indirect effect. This is something that we cannot counter-argue. There is no way around it. If women are not sitting at the table, it affects them directly and negatively. As we all know, the nature of negotiations and those who reach the peace table and the negotiation table, especially those who are representing the different political actors or the fighting parties on the ground, they are there to fight for their interests, they are there to fight for their ideology, they are there pretty much to fight for themselves. Whether this is something for the good or for the bad, this is the nature of any negotiation. So in simple words, if you are sitting at the negotiation table and you're representing one of the fighting parties, because logic says if you picked up your arms and you're fighting someone else, then you're definitely fighting for yourself, in the sense of like, you need to ensure that what you believe in is going to win. So the question then is, who is representing the women? Who's representing the needs of women? Who's representing the beliefs of women? So in order to actually ensure that women's rights are addressed properly, comprehensively, we need to have women sitting at the decision-making table, not only in track 2, not only in supplementary conversations, but at the decision-making table itself. And we also need to remember that when we're talking about women's rights, we're not only talking about women. We're talking about the rights of 50% of the society. We're talking about human rights. So having women sitting at the table, it's a way even for the mediator, the facilitator, to ensure that the conversation is not only about power sharing settlements, it's not a conversation that is narrowed, but it's a conversation that reflects the society itself. And this takes me to another very important factor, that when we're saying that women need to sit at the table, we're also saying that we need to have feminist voices at the table. So we need the voices that will be present at the table, that will say and that will speak out loud gender equality. Those who are going to ensure that the outcomes of the negotiations are gender sensitive, those who are going to ensure that the negotiation itself and the agenda of the negotiations once again reflect 50% of the society. So we're not really asking for much, you know, when we say that women need to be part of formal peace negotiations and peace processes. We're talking about 50% of the society, so it sounds fair. And on this day, I just want to really request mediators and facilitators of peace processes to please remember that if you are acting as a mediator or a facilitator of a peace process and you are responsible on convening the whole process, then you have an important role to play when it comes to safeguarding women's equal participation. And this role is a dual role. You can, first of all, play a role when it comes to directly including women to the peace negotiations and to have them sitting at the peace table. And you can also play a role when it comes to ensuring that women are equally and meaningfully participating. And I'm excited by what we've heard so far, in the sense that, it's really urgent and it's time to start talking about what's next.
Wonderful. Hajer, thank you so much for that, and for reminding us that when we talk about women's rights, we are talking about the rights of half of society, and that those are intrinsically linked to building peace in conflict settings as well. Let's turn now to the issue of girls' rights to education. And Paloma, if I can bring you in here, out-of-school girls face increased risk of violence, child labor, child marriage, and teen pregnancies. And we've particularly seen this in the context of COVID-19 in the past 2 years. And yet only 42% of countries had programs to support girls' return to school in 2021. As an activist working on youth involvement, how important is girls' education to raising youth voices and activism?
Thank you so much for this question. I think it's very important, and I could not agree more with the woman that spoke before me. We need more representation. And for that, for a meaningful and effective participation, we need three main things: access to information, deliberative and blinding spaces for participating, and education. Education is key, is fundamental. It is through education that we make it possible to understand the informations that are shared. It is through education that we empower and teach women about decolonialization, about patriarchalism. It is through investing in education that we can boost solutions that are already happening on the ground. And it's through investing in people that we guarantee our future as humanity. And women and girls still doesn't have the same opportunities as you even shared, which is unacceptable. How many women do we really see, like as the DSG said, really occupying these decision-making spaces? Every child, every girl, every woman should have the right to be free and to live in freedom. That's why women like you, like me, like us that are present here, we have this duty to make sure that we are opening more and more spaces for women to participate in this entire process. So I congrats all of you for taking the lead, and how much it's needed for us to keep opening those spaces for all the women, for all the young girls that are coming around.
Thank you so much for that, Paloma, and also for speaking to education, not just in the sense of school buildings, but really investing in half of society and ongoing education. As we have just heard, gender inequality is deeply rooted in many societal issues. And it's clear that only by ensuring equal rights and an investment in education that we can build the foundation for sustainable development. Thank you so much, all of you, for your insights. We will now continue the dialogue with our second topic, but an issue that we've already begun to touch upon, and that is women's equal representation and inclusive economic growth. In other words, investing in women. Deputy Secretary General, this year's International Women's Day is being held under the theme Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. And it's focused on the climate crisis and disaster risk reduction, and gender equality at the heart of that. As we know, in the context of climate change, women are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change due to the difficulties in adapting because of inequality, economic insecurity. Intersectionality between the Sustainable Development Goals couldn't be more obvious, and you often speak about Goal 5 as the docking station for all of the goals. Why is it so important to include a gender perspective across all of the SDGs, and how can we achieve a better acknowledgement and visibility of that?
Why is a no-brainer. I mean, without women in the picture and in the results of the 2030 agenda, there won't be a 2030 agenda. And what we need to do about it is that every plan and strategy that we have, we need to look at it to see how are we involving the impacts that we need to see in women, in girls' lives. Whether it's in food systems or it's energy transitions or the digital world, in every single strategy we have for the SDGs, there is a component there that we have to ask the question, where are the women? And in every single case, it's not the same country by country, region by region. So we must not put this in a cookie cutter. It's not the same for everyone. And we have to look at the context. We have to look at where people are in development in that particular region, country, society, and take them with us. And I think that's the sustainability. So plans are important, strategies are important, and they shouldn't just be words on paper. They need to go past the sterile consultations that have been had in the past and to be really, I think, engendered in what we intend to be moving forward as an investment plan. The second is that we need to find the youth voice in our plans. This is something that we speak about, youth are with us, they're at the center of things, they're important, it's about their future. Okay, it's all now. How do we find the space for youth, not just in the consultation, but in the workplace? We have young people in the UN. Are they around the table of decision making? So it's the same question that we ask of women, we need to ask about the youth. And if there is to be an intergenerational transition, if we're not listening to what it is they're going to be in the future, we're setting up the wrong solutions, which will fail, and there will be no sustainability. So I think it's very important for us to be listening, to be engaging, to be involving, and freeing up the space that we need to have them there to make sufficient input to shape the future now. And then the last thing I would say, it's really, really important for us to find a set of metrics that hasn't gone through a process 500 times that it comes out meaning nothing. There are some very basic metrics in the lives of young people, of women and girls, which we should be able to use to measure whether we're making any impact or not. We've been waiting for baselines and data, since 2015. We still don't have a full set of baselines around the world in terms of our statistics and data for gender, just the gender goal. And so I think that we need to develop a set of metrics that tests us, pushes us, and calls us out when these basic issues have not. And it's those metrics that we should use to define whether we achieved a result or not. And I think that that's something that we need to push ourselves with. Many people are not asking or putting on the table some of those metrics. So if, for instance, you are saying you have increased employment in the job market by 5 million, of that 5 million, how many are women? And of those women, where are they? What level of society are they at? And really ask those tough questions so that you put women and girls behind the percentages and the figures that seem right now to sort of fly over the top of people's heads.
So being informed by data, statistics, and evidence, and centering the youth voice. And perhaps we can stay on that thread of centering the youth voice. And Paloma, bring you in here. If you can tell us a little bit about why is it so important, as the DSG has said, that we have the youth voice at the center of this conversation on climate change. And perhaps you can share with us an anecdote from your own experience on this.
Thank you so much. And I feel like the DSG said everything. For youth people, for women, we cannot think on a long-term strategy without involving the voice of the people that are going to be there, that are going to be impacted. We need to share this power. We need to change for real, for good. And I will tell you a story about how important it is that we share here, for example, in Brazil, with the representation of different women in politics and decision-making spaces. During pandemic, it was those women really fighting for access to vaccine, for changing and for taking care of the needs of the communities. And I feel like that this happens because we naturally care and nurture the environment that we inhabit. It's like we fight because we know how essential it is to have at least respect. Our only woman deputy and indigenous here from Brazil, for example, it was essential to bring vaccination, to bring the basic needs for the indigenous communities, and because she was there leading that into the Congress. And I feel from this secular pain that we've been feeling as women, at some point we started creating spaces to heal. As we are constantly threatened, we've grown with a natural disposition for cure. And we empower the community around us. I'm seeing that not only in the Congress, but also the young activists that lead the marches, that lead the changes, that hold up the society that was falling apart because the structures were not sustainable at all. And I feel we can no longer accept that there are still people having their existence threatened, even youth, even environmentalists, even women. We need to invest in people. We need to stamp our diversity on decision-making spaces. We need to guarantee this right for 50% of our population. And we need to empower marginalized groups for building collective solutions. I mean, we as women, we as young people, we've been carrying of a world that surrounds us, and we don't have the space. So how are we going to guarantee that our voices and that the solutions that we need, the actions that we are taking on the ground, they are really taken seriously? They are really taken forward. And I mean, for that, we need the space. We need to be respected. And I feel as women, we've been leading that because we always been fighting for respect. And now we are empowering each other. And this is very, very important.
Paloma, thank you so much for that. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about the intersection between care and climate. And I'm actually going to use this as an opportunity to turning to you, Nurtaç. Already before the pandemic, women only held 28% of managerial positions in the workplace worldwide. In addition, women were already doing 3 times the unpaid care work and domestic housework that men were doing. And of course, that's only increased in the context of COVID-19, although we have also seen increased visibility to this challenge. Can you tell us a little bit, reflecting on your experience and passion for organizational development, why is it important to have equal representation of women in the workplace?
Of course, thank you very much for having me today about our mission at Godiva to empower women. It's an organization that also lives according to the namesake of Lady Godiva, who 1,000 years ago, according to the story, empowered the people to have equal rights and to defend for the fairness. And for that, we also have strategically and organically built equal rights in our company. In fact, we have currently 60% of our company's managers and directors women, and notably 53% of our senior executives are women. When it comes to women leadership, Godiva is leading and serving as an example for the industry. In fact, if you look at the top-level executives at Godiva, more than 2/3 of the executive committee are female, myself included. And in our parent company at Yıldız Holding, we built also an initiative for the women platform in order to empower women for their equal rights. In addition to this powerful representation of women inside Godiva, our organization has also achieved external success in uplifting communities around the world through the Lady Godiva initiative, which we launched last year. In 5 countries, we are operating in Canada, US, Belgium, UK, and China. We selected non-government organizations that empower women. And we are continuing that program. Each year, we are supporting these organizations, and these organizations are selected by our employees for their contribution to the empowerment of women. Why is it so important for us? It's very important, first of all, because it's not logical to exclude women from economic life, from business life. It doesn't make sense. If you think about all the women in history, in the current world, in your families, in your close circles, and the impact they make to your lives, how can you exclude them? It's not logical. How can you exclude all that power, all that contribution they bring? They support, they raise families, they take shopping decisions, they contribute in a way also to the economy, even if they are not in professional life. How can you exclude half of the talent in the world if we are currently in this world living with the scarcity of talent. It is not logical. So if you would like to make smart choices, it doesn't make sense to exclude women. Also economically, if you would like to add women's productivity to the economic life, their contribution to your company, to the world, to the countries' economies, you need to have them productive. You cannot leave women with dependency, economic dependency to others. You need to bring them with their powers, with their contribution and talent to economic life. And I must say that many of our female leaders have been the leaders of our success so far, and we strongly believe that without women we wouldn't be able to achieve that. We will continue to be pioneers of female leadership in our company, in the environments that we will support.
Wonderful. Nurtaç, thank you so much for that. Amazing to hear 53% of your senior leadership are women. This is also an achievement that the UN Secretary General has achieved in the UN system for the first time in 7 decades. We have parity in senior leadership here in the UN, and we can really see the impact that it is having inside the institution. As you said, it's simply illogical to exclude half the talent of the world. And I think that really makes the case for this second segment on women's equal participation and economic inclusion. I'd like to turn now to the third topic for discussion today, which is taking emergency action to end all forms of violence against women and girls. Executive Director, if I can turn to you on this. Violence against women and girls during COVID-19 has increased exponentially. UN Women's own research shows this. According to recent estimates, 245 million women and girls over the age of 15 have been subject to sexual or physical violence in the past 12 months. The Secretary General has called for an end to all forms of violence, from war zones to people's homes, and is now asking every member state to enact an emergency plan to address and end and drive to zero all forms of violence against women and girls. Can you tell us, what would an effective emergency plan look like?
Well, thank you. I think what I can say initially is that we always need to be prepared for any kind of pandemic, for any kind of emergency that might affect women and girls. This is something very important that we have learned from COVID-19. From the onset of the pandemic, we were unprepared to handle the issues of violence against women. We were unprepared to ensure that the services continue and that the prevention programs also continue. Thus, we see, as you mentioned, that many women were subjected to violence against them. We have done some studies in 13 countries around the world. It shows that 7 out of 10 women reported that they have been subjected to some kind of abuse during the pandemic. And also, we found that 4 out of 10 women feel unsafe in public spaces. And this is something that we really need to address, and as soon as possible, we need to ensure that women are not subjected to that. We need to ensure that their equal rights in feeling safe, in having safe environments, safe homes is something that is realized and addressed as soon as possible. I think we have only 8 years to go to the SDGs and to the implementation and the realization of all SDGs, and therefore we really have to accelerate all these programs that will ensure that women are safe and are empowered and are continue to be included, as all the young ladies here with us on the screen, as they have suggested. Inclusion for us is extremely important, and also making sure that the voices and the agency of younger women is coming to the fore on all issues, including on violence against women and girls and how they experience. And I think one of the major issues that we need to look at as well with our young generation is violence online, because during the pandemic, when everything shifted to online, we saw a rise in violence online against young women, against women, human rights defenders, against women even who were just expressing their opinion, and against women also who were running for office or for public participation in any way, shape or form. And this affects mental health. It affects, productivity. It also affects participation in so many ways in society and including politically. And this is something we don't want to see halted by women because we were short of addressing the issues of violence against them. In the common agenda, as you mentioned, the Secretary General of the UN have asked that we every single country puts an emergency plan to deal with this emergency of violence against women and to see how best we can put the policies, the laws, the resources, and the political will, which is most important, to ensure that violence against women is not only addressed, but that it is prevented and that it ends in the end, because this is the objective. The objective is to end violence against women in every corner of the world as much as we can and as quickly as we can. And to be able to do this as well, we should not only concentrate on women and girls, we should concentrate on men and on boys. And this something brings me to also the education that was mentioned earlier in this discussion. Education of boys and how to be positive, masculine young boys in society, how they can influence and learn to be positive in their culture about women, how to be able to live in the same spaces with women as equal. After all, we talk about gender equality. Gender equality is about men and boys at the same time. So we need to be able to ensure that men and boys are included, and at the same time to ensure that women do have social protection, that women do have livelihood opportunities, and are also better integrated politically and economically in their societies and in the world that they live. We need also to see partnerships, how we can bring partnerships to bear to help us prevent and end violence against women. And here I give an example of the Spotlight Initiative, which is an initiative that is being implemented by the United Nations and the European Union to help bring about laws and policies and action on the ground to prevent violence against women and to help the society also understand what needs to be done in terms of laws and in terms of all kinds of actions needed and resources to be put in local communities to help address violence against women. And this is something very successful to date. The project has been able to change many laws or to affect positively about 80-something laws throughout the countries where we are working, and many also perpetrators of violence against women, up to about 22% were also subjected to trials and to justice and the measures that they need to face once they do these kinds of violence against women. So I think also the UN is extremely ready to support all member states, any member states that want to look at how to prevent and how to stop violence against women, including not only the governments, but also civil society, youth groups, young people, and these are important. And I call on all young people who are with us here on the screen and who are watching also as well to see how best we can always put the lens of gender equality and violence against women as we are doing the work that any one of you is doing in your own field, to see how best you can make sure that this does not happen and that inclusion of women and girls who can help and or who have survived this can be also part and parcel of the programs that we work on and the initiatives that we want to achieve. So addressing violence is important, preventing violence is important. Most important is to end violence against women, and as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And so strengthening partnerships, acting with urgency, greater investment, the voices of young people, and engaging men and boys. And I wonder if on that last issue, DSG, if I can just turn to you. In the course of the pandemic last year, you taped a video for social media. Engaging with and speaking to young men in your home country of Nigeria. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that video, what prompted it and what was your message through that video?
Well, thank you. And just listening to Sima, it did remind me that at that particular time, there was such a pushback against young women who came up with what we would say is absolutely zero tolerance for rape, for abuse, for harassment, and the backlash that these young women got from their male counterparts was of more concern to me than, in fact, what they had said, because it was like, wow, okay, does my son think like this? And he was the one that I went straight to say, this is, I mean, what do you think about this? Of course, he thought that it was completely wrong. I wasn't sure till he said it. But then I thought, okay, we need to speak about this, and he needs also to talk to his folk and stand up with, with their partners, the other part of humanity to it. But a realization that you've got to bring the boys into it. And maybe just to say targeting. For me, targeting the policy space is important, but be very specific that we are speaking about our homes. So in the community, I mean, it starts there. It starts in the home, the way in which parents, community build up a acceptance that it's okay to push or shove a girl to begin with, and then to say, well, you're the older brother so that you can hit her. I mean, you cannot do that. That's where it begins. So I think it's very important for us to look at that. Look at the workplace. It's also acceptable in many cultures to be despicable in workplaces. There are different, the range from here to here, as I've found out in the UN, is huge. So some people will say, well, this is cultural. Well, what is cultural about abusing a woman? And so you need to step back and think, okay, what kind of a workplace do we want? And respect for each other. And then online, as she said, in politics. In politics, I mean, this is where we're asking for women to be in politics. It's not possible. And yet, sometimes I hear men say, well, I don't want my wife to be in politics because A, the time is really late at night, and B, I don't know what they're going to be doing there, and it's a seedy place to go to. So change the environment of politics. You said you don't want your wife to go there, so stop being 3 a.m. in the morning and let's talk about politics at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So I think some of the ways in which we see where GBV is had, we need to change that environment. Perhaps last two things, Nahla, the security agencies, the people in the security agencies. There is a really important role for us to play, that the leadership of security, police, army, wherever you find them, needs to be more women. And we really need to see in those forces that it is women that go out to women and not the men that go out to women. This is not going to work if you want to change that environment. The unconscious bias is huge, that you deserve it because you wore this, or because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every space should be free and safe. So I think the security agencies we need to tackle, and the legal system. The legal system also, either, in the best case scenario, they want to protect you, so they don't even allow you to have your day in court because they say it's going to be so terrible for you, it's better that you don't talk. But we should be making environments in a legal system that it's okay for you to go there and get justice. And so I think that we, on the gender-based violence, it's really important that we tackle these in a granular way. And that we start to make champions of the men. I'm not just talking about for the he for she, which is a great campaign, and they wear the badge, but you don't know what they do at home. What I want us to do is to take a leader who sits at the helm of affairs and every day asks the men, so what about the zero tolerance for violence against women? It's not acceptable. So unless men are championing this cause in real ways, as some did with HIV and AIDS, it's when they did it with HIV and AIDS that the stigma went aside, we started to get drugs there, we started to see a difference. So I think men too have to be champions in this, and they should do so without being asked. They should also appreciate that there is a pandemic out there. It's silent, and it's pretty deadly for many women.
Absolutely. So we need leadership at the highest levels. And Deja, you spoke about the impact, the implications of violence in the home, in the workplace, in school, online, in the political space. And of course, we know that all of this is aggravated and escalated in contexts of conflict. And I think, Executive Director, as you said, we need to always be ready for that crisis because we know that crises escalate violence against women and girls. Hajer, I wonder if I can just bring you in here and speak a little bit to that. What can we do? We know that violence escalates in contexts of crises. What more do we need to do to prevent, respond, raise awareness on this issue?
Absolutely. As a general note, it seems that the issue of gender-based violence, although as DSG mentioned, some might say, it's culture. It's fine that it's happening, let's say, in Libya or in other countries, but it's not happening in country XYZ because it's not our culture, right? And the thing I want to say to that is that in order for us to really fight and end and prevent gender-based violence, we need to first, all of us, admit and recognize that it's actually a universal issue. It has nothing to do with culture. And in order for us to actually address the core issues, first of all, collectively, we need to stop making gender-based violence cool and sexy. Because these are things that we still see on the media. We listen to it in songs, we watch it on movies. For some reason, the notion that, it's fine to perform any sort of gender-based violence or violence against women, in some forms, it seems to be still accepted. And unfortunately, it could even come across to some people as cool. It's something sexy to do, right? And we see that a lot on social media. And even in conflict-affected countries, as you can imagine, the forms of extreme violence that women go through, it's unimaginable. We're talking about levels of extreme violence that could end up being kidnapping women, torturing women, assassinating women, and this is also a form, when it comes to the violence that is performed, it's also targeted. For an example, you see in Libya, but in other countries, you see targeted violence against powerful, outspoken women. And this is not only going through the individual woman per se, but it's also sending a signal, it's sending a message that, if you dare to speak out, if you dare to say the truth, then we're gonna just shut you down. And unfortunately, in countries that are affected by conflict, it's almost difficult to start speaking about the role of state, because, for an example, in Libya, but also other countries that are affected by conflict, we're talking about countries where there is no rule of law. So it's almost really difficult to imagine that you can talk to the state and say, well, you need to do something about it. And here, by no means, and I'm saying that the state, for example, the state of Libya does not have responsibility. But what I'm saying is that if we really want to address, prevent, and end gender-based violence against women in conflict, then we need to start thinking smartly, and we need to start to think outside of the box. For an example, one of the things that could be utilized is diplomatic power, because we all know that the fighting groups on the ground, the armed groups, but also the different actors, they are still part of the international community, right? Because at the end of the day, we are a globalized world. It doesn't matter if there are borders that we can see on the map. It doesn't matter if we see walls. It doesn't matter if we see checkpoints, passport control. We're still a globalized world. We're still very much connected. So there are ways to leverage some sort of power, it could be diplomatic, it could be soft forms of accountability. Just don't let it pass through as if it's fine to assassinate a woman on the street, and then for this particular group, for an example, to imagine that they can still sit on the negotiation table, they can still gain international legitimacy. So we really need to start thinking creatively and thinking outside of the box. What can we really do? It's not about looking at our current books and looking at the rules we've written now and trying to enforce them only. Because if these rules are unenforceable, then the issue is just going to remain. And then also another important issue, which has been mentioned, I think, by Dr. Sima, the issue of social media. I think we need to start talking to social media companies, and I know they are aware of that. I know we are talking to them, but they really need to understand that their platforms, it's utilized in a very horrible way. To give you an example, there's been couple of campaigns against women activists in Libya, for an example. And there's been a photo of a women's rights activist, a very private one. She took a selfie with her phone and someone hacked her phone and published the photos. And I was one of the people who reported it to Facebook. And I thought, well, great, they're going to look at this and they're going to understand that this is an intimate photo, that woman did not publish it herself. And after a few hours, I got a response. You got a report for your reporting. And I thought, well, this is great. They took quick action. And then I was extremely disappointed when I read the result of their report to my reporting by saying, well, when we checked the photo, it seemed that it didn't violate our Facebook rules, our community rules, but we suggest you to unfollow the page that published the photo. And I was just thinking, how come did someone look at this photo and assume that it does not violate the rules? It's clearly a photo that no one would have published on their own. So we need to start talking to social media companies and make them understand that you cannot solve certain issues with algorithms or, quick checking of photos and with rules. You also need to understand the context. This photo, if it was, for an example, published in Germany or in another country, it might have been fine. But in a context for a Libyan woman, that was really horrible. And still, it passed the test, So we need to start addressing gender-based violence, not by the rules we have now only, but we need to be creative and leverage all the power we have in the sense of what can we do? How can we solve it? Not what are the rules we have right now that enable us to solve it, because unfortunately, we don't really have enough rules for that.
Hajer, thank you so much for that, for reminding us that violence against women and girls is still incredibly pervasive, universal, and that the stigma too often still attaches to the victims rather than the perpetrators, but also that we need to engage in new ways in ending this, and for being very concrete in what it is that we need to do going forward. The last 2 years in the pandemic has been a particularly difficult time for women and girls, and it's encouraging to know that we have such strong leadership from women leaders committed to ending all forms of violence against women and girls. DSG, thank you so much for convening us for this conversation today, and I want to turn over to you to conclude and to share any takeaways and to come back to that question for us of what's next.
I hope that what's next will be about us accelerating to achieve the 2030 agenda. There's no reason why we shouldn't. There's an amazing number of women already in leadership in places where we never expected them. I think today I'm meeting for the first time Nurtaç. I'm meeting the first time. I wish I'd met you a long time ago, because the only thing that anyone can bribe me with is chocolate. But it's great to hear your thoughts on women in leadership and business and how that can open up. That's something that we should take into the space of accelerating the 2030 agenda on gender-based violence, on youth participation. I think what worries me most today is that I need to see the women's constituency coming together much more strongly, and not to be divided, because we will fail. Our diversity, the voices that we have in the women's constituency, of feminists, of politicians, of indigenous people, of youth, all bring a value proposition to getting the other 50% visible and right up front and center. And I think that that's what I hope that we will focus on in the division of labor as we go forward in the next 8 years to attain the 2030 agenda. It's really exciting. There are many problems out there, but we've got far many more solutions. And that's what we need to get behind, is the solutions, and do them country by country, community by community, region by region, and just go for it. And we are here with our fearless leader from UN Women, Sima. So she'll be leading the charge, and I hope all of you will join us, not behind us, at our side, in front if you're faster, because I can tell you'll be faster than Sima and I, because we're a little over the age, so you've got more energy and more vision. So, Nahla, thank you very much. It's been a fantastic get-together. And we should just do more of this, replicate this wherever you are. Women's voices are important at this time of our history.
Thank you so much, DSG. And before we conclude, so we now have our to-do list. We have a sense of urgency. We have a roadmap for the next 8 years. But before we conclude, I would just like to ask each of you to give us one word that you are going into this International Women's Day with, and that you would like us to take away from this conversation. And Nurtaç, I'm going to begin with you.
The one word is respect.
Respect. Wonderful. Thank you. Hajer?
I would say fast. Do it fast.
Fast, urgent. Absolutely. Paloma?
I would say re-earth. Re-earth.
Sorry, say that again?
Re-earth as our mother nature, our mother earth. Re-earth. Your conscience, your heart,
absolutely.
Everything. We need to come back again.
What a great word. Yeah. Executive Director?
My word is urgency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And DSG, final word to you.
I have so many words that I want to use, but I would say ambition. Just go for it. The sky's the limit. Ambition.
Wonderful. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And a special thank you to our friends at Project Everyone for collaborating on the to-do list for gender equality. We are stronger together when women rise for all. Thank you.
Thank you.